There's a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up at the door with luggage. It doesn't write you a letter. It accumulates the way dust does in corners behind things in the parts of a room nobody thinks to look at. And by the time you notice it, it's been there so long it almost feels like furniture. Daniel Marsh noticed it on a Tuesday. Not a significant Tuesday. Not the anniversary of anything. Not the day of a promotion or a loss or a phone call that changed something. Just a Tuesday in mid-October, when the London sky was doing that particular thing it does in autumn, gray without being dramatic about it, like someone had stretched a sheet of dirty wool from one rooftop to the other and called it weather. He was sitting in a laundrette on Pimlico Road, seat closest to the wall, the one with the plastic slightly cracked at the left armrest. He knew it was cracked because he always chose the same seat. 43 minutes, every other Sunday, except this was a Tuesday because his roster had shifted and now his days off were wrong. Tuesday and Wednesday instead of Saturday and Sunday, which meant the world was arranged for people who were free on weekends, and he was not those people anymore. The machine in front of him was doing its slow circular thing. He was watching it, not reading, not on his phone, just watching the clothes rotate, his regulation trousers, 2 undershirts, 1 pair of civilian socks that he bought 18 months ago and still felt faintly guilty about because the color was a dark burgundy and nothing in his life was supposed to be burgundy. The woman 3 machines down was talking on the phone in Portuguese. Loud, animated, laughing at something on the other end, then serious, then laughing again. The teenage boy near the dryers had earphones in and was doing something with his thumbs on a screen. The old man by the window was asleep with his chin on his chest. Daniel watched the clothes turn. The thought came the way those thoughts always come. Not as a question, more as a statement that arrives completed, like it was assembled somewhere else and delivered. I have never spoken to another guard. Not off duty. Not once. He let that sit. The Portuguese woman laughed again. He let it sit some more. He'd been at the Household Cavalry Mounted Regiment for 4 years and 3 months. Before that, 18 months at Windsor. Before that, training. Before that, 19 years of being a person in Shropshire who'd never thought much about guardsmen, except as background to tourist photographs. He knew their names, some of them. Morrison, who smelled like menthol sweets and ate the same meal deal from Boots every single shift. Aldridge, who had a habit of flexing his jaw when standing post, rhythmically, like he was working through something tough. Kendall, the newest, who blinked too much in the first weeks, and then stopped blinking almost entirely, which was worse. He knew what their boots looked like. He knew the sound of Morrison's kit when it wasn't quite properly fastened, a very faint rattle, barely audible, that Morrison had never fixed in 4 years, because Morrison had a theory that rules about kit existed in inverse proportion to rules about character. Daniel didn't agree with the theory, but he'd thought about it. What he didn't know was where Morrison went when the shift ended. Whether Aldridge had people. Whether Kendall, the new one, the blinker, had somebody at home who asked him how it went. He'd never wondered until this Tuesday. The machine turning. The burgundy sock appearing at the glass, and then disappearing again, swallowed back into the rotation. The first time he'd stood post at Whitehall, someone had told him a thing. Not a supervisor. Not a senior guardsman. The man who'd sold him a coffee from the van on the corner. Small, dark, heavy with cardamom. A man who seemed to be perpetually there regardless of what time Daniel arrived, like the van had roots. You know what they say about your job? The man had said, handing over the cup. Daniel had said nothing, which was answer enough. They say you have the hardest job in London, because the job is to be there without being there, to be present and absent at the same time. He'd shrugged. That's hard for a person. Most people, they can't do it. They leak. Something always leaks. A smile, a flinch, a look. You people, you've trained the leaking out of you. Daniel had taken the coffee and walked away. He'd thought about it for approximately 6 days after. Trained the leaking out of you. Because the thing was, it wasn't just on duty. That was the part nobody explained to you during selection and training, the part that didn't appear in any documentation. The composure didn't switch off cleanly when you handed back the bearskin. It calcified. It became the shape of you. And after long enough in that shape, You stopped noticing where the uniform ended and you began. The laundrette machine beeped. He didn't move immediately. He gave it 3 seconds, an old habit, not reacting to the first signal of anything, and then stood, extracted his laundry, transferred it to the dryer. The Portuguese woman had finished her phone call. Now she was folding things with extreme precision, making very tight squares out of what looked like children's shirts. Small shirts, bright colors. She worked fast and said nothing. Daniel put coins in the dryer. He thought about Morrison. Specifically, he thought about the one time, 4 years ago, maybe 4.5, when he and Morrison had been posted within 20 feet of each other at Horse Guards, and it had started raining in a very horizontal way, the kind of rain that a bearskin is not architecturally designed to handle. They'd been in full kit, unmoving, and the rain had been aggressive and personal, and at one point, just once, Morrison had cut his eyes sideways, and Daniel had caught it. Not a look of suffering, a look of pure, compressed, almost theological absurdity. Can you believe this? Can you believe this is what we're doing right now? Daniel had felt his jaw tighten to suppress something. It lasted half a second. It was the closest they'd ever come to communicating like people. He had carried that half second for 4 years and hadn't known it until now, in a laundrette on Pimlico Road, watching a dryer begin its identical rotation. He left when the cycle finished, laundry folded into his bag with the automatic neatness of a man who has made corners for so long that every cloth surface becomes a corner to be made. Outside, Pimlico Road was doing ordinary Tuesday things. A bus went past. A courier nearly took out a cyclist, and both of them swore at each other and continued. A woman with a pushchair was negotiating a curb with the expression of someone engaged in a minor war. Daniel stood on the pavement for longer than he needed to. He had no destination that required urgency. His flat was 9 minutes away. He had food. He had a book he was most of the way through and had been most of the way through for 6 weeks because reading required a sitting-down willingness that kept not materializing. He started walking, not toward home, just walking, which was unusual. He was a man of routes, deliberate, efficient, point A to point B, without scenic detours. Walking without destination felt faintly irresponsible, like leaving a door unlocked. He turned on a Vauxhall Bridge Road and kept going. The city smelled like petrol and rained on concrete, and something frying from a place he couldn't identify. Black cabs accumulated at a light. A group of tourists in matching anoraks crossed at the wrong moment, and a driver leaned on his horn, and the tourists accelerated with the chaotic energy of a school of startled fish. Daniel watched all of this like a person watching a film he'd seen before. Not unpleasantly, just at a distance. That's hard for a person. Most people, they can't do it. They leak. He passed a pub. He'd passed this pub. The Marquee, dark wood, lamplight through the window, 2 men outside with pints despite the cold. Probably 100 times. Maybe more. Always past it. Never in it. He stopped. One of the men outside glanced at him with mild curiosity, the way anyone glances at a man standing still on a pavement. Daniel looked at the window. Lamplight. The shape of people inside, indistinct. The sound, muffled, low conversation, and something soft on a radio. He thought, Morrison probably drinks somewhere. Not this pub. Morrison would drink somewhere with less. Elegance wasn't the right word. Less deliberateness. Somewhere that didn't try. Morrison had that quality himself. The active refusal to try at the things that weren't worth trying at, combined with an almost violent attention to the things that were. He thought, I don't know where Morrison drinks. He thought, Morrison doesn't know I exist outside of Post. He thought, none of them do. This is the part that's difficult to explain to someone who hasn't done the job. Because from the outside, from the tourist side, the camera phone side, the 45 seconds of staring before moving on side, the guardsmen look like a singular thing. Like a unit. Like they must all eat together and live together and exist in some collective barracks brotherhood. Because what else could sustain a man through hours of absolute stillness and institutional invisibility? The answer, and this is what Daniel understood, standing outside the Marquee on a Tuesday in October, finally, after 4 years, is that nothing sustains it. Not collectively. Each man sustains it alone, through whatever private architecture he's built for the purpose. And the solitude isn't incidental to the job. The solitude is structural. The solitude is the job. You are a wall. Walls don't speak to other walls on their day off. He almost laughed at that. He didn't, because a laugh on a pavement alone is a different kind of signal than a laugh in company, and he was too aware of signals. He walked into the pub. Nobody looked at him. This is the thing people don't understand about public solitude. The terror isn't that people see you. The terror is that they don't, and it turns out you wanted them to, and you didn't know it until the moment it doesn't happen. He ordered a pint of something the barman suggested when Daniel failed to specify, because he stood at the bar for 4 seconds without naming a drink, and the barman, a young man with a beard and the professional patience of someone who has seen many kinds of Tuesday people, said, "Something on tap? The ESB's good tonight," and Daniel said yes because the decision had been made for him, and that was unexpectedly a relief. He took the pint to a small table near the wall. Not the corner. The corner felt too deliberate. Near the wall, but not at the corner. A table for two with a second chair at a slight angle, as if someone had just left it. He drank. It was good. The ESB was actually good, rich and slightly bitter, and with a warmth that arrived in the chest. Not theatrical warmth, just the quiet kind that settles. He looked around the pub with the habit of a man trained to scan environments without appearing to scan them. Table to his left, a couple in their 30s, both looking at phones, occasionally showing each other something on a screen, and reacting. Not unhappy, just a specific mode of togetherness. Table ahead, 4 women, 1 occasion, something being celebrated, cake mentioned, someone's name said with the particular lift that means birthday. Bar, 3 separate men drinking separately, the way single drinkers do in British pubs, not antisocially, just with a kind of mutual acknowledgement of each other's right to silence. And then, at the far end of the bar, slightly turned away, nursing something amber in a short glass. Daniel looked. Looked again. The posture. That's what gave it away. Not the face. The face was turned, and he couldn't see it properly. The posture. The very specific geometry of a man trained to occupy space in a particular way. The shoulders set. The stillness of the upper body. The feet placed not casually, but squarely, even on a bar stool, even in civilian clothes, even apparently after 2 of whatever was in that short glass. He knew that posture. He lived inside a version of that posture. He sat with his pint, and he stared, measured, careful, trained, at the back of the man at the bar. The man shifted fractionally. Daniel saw the profile. Aldridge, there's a protocol for this situation. Daniel understood that instantly. With the same unconscious speed, he understood protocols for everything else. Which corridor to use when, which rank acknowledged which first, which direction to look when something civilian and confusing happened on the approach road to Horse Guards. The protocol, unwritten, unspoken, somehow universally understood among every guardsman he'd ever met, was as follows. You have not seen him. He has not seen you. You are not here in the same way, even if you are here in the same room. You are 2 men in a pub, not 2 guardsmen in a pub, and the distinction matters because guardsmen in a pub implies a sociality that the job has never permitted and the culture has never encouraged, and if he was being fully honest, sitting at his table with his pint getting slightly less cold. Neither of them has probably ever figured out how to initiate. You nod if your eyes meet. That's it. That's the protocol. Daniel drank his ESB and did not nod because Aldridge hadn't turned around yet, and you didn't offer the nod to the back of a man's head. That wasn't a nod. That was just a person moving their head alone in a pub, and that was its own kind of signal. Aldridge's name was, well, it was Aldridge. First name, Thomas. Tommy, he thought he'd heard once from Kendall, who'd said it with the easy familiarity of men who'd come up through training together, the same intake, and so had that shared history that Daniel had arrived too late and too sideways to ever be part of. Tommy Aldridge, 31 or 32, Daniel calculated from various overheard things. From somewhere in the Northeast. Not Geordie, not quite, but with traces of it, rounded vowels that showed up when he wasn't monitoring himself. Ex-infantry before the regiment. A brother somewhere who worked on rigs. How did Daniel know about the brother on the rigs? He didn't know how he knew. Accumulated peripheral information, gathered the way all information is gathered when you spend thousands of hours in close physical proximity to people you never speak to, through overhearing, through inference, through the details that leak out around the edges of even the most disciplined silence. They leak. Something always leaks. He watched Aldridge finish his drink. Order another. The barman knew what it was without being told, which meant this was a regular thing. A regular Tuesday thing, or a regular whatever-day Aldridge roster gave him thing. The thought arrived fully formed and slightly embarrassing. We probably have the same days off. The shift pattern is the same. We've probably been sitting in separate rooms on the same day for 4 years. He looked at the ceiling briefly, because looking at the ceiling is what you do when you've thought something that requires a second of internal distance. Aldridge turned. Not all the way. Not dramatically. He turned the way people turn at bars, shifting his weight, reaching for something, reorienting his body in that loose way of a man 2 drinks and who has temporarily stopped actively managing his posture. Their eyes met. 2 seconds. The blink. The very slight recalibration. The recognition, not of him exactly, but of the category of him. The specific geometry. The same scan, happening in both directions simultaneously. Aldridge nodded. Daniel nodded. This was correct. This was the protocol executed perfectly. 2 professional men acknowledging the existence of each other, and then the understanding was returning to their respective solitudes without further requirement. Aldridge turned back to the bar. Daniel drank his pint. 7 minutes passed. In 7 minutes, the couple to his left finished their drinks and left. The birthday table got louder. One of the solo drinkers at the bar paid and went out into the October dark. The barman changed something on the sound system, and for a moment it was jazz, then it was something quieter that might also have been jazz. Aldridge turned around again. This was outside the protocol. The nod had happened. The nod was the end of the interaction. The turning around again was, Daniel didn't have a word for what it was, because there wasn't a word for it in the vocabulary he'd been operating in for 4 years. It was a new word, an uncharted word. Aldridge looked at Daniel's table, at the empty second chair, back at Daniel. The question in it was very small and very clear. Daniel didn't nod this time. He moved his chin, not down, just fractionally to the side toward the chair. An invitation that could be uninvited if misread. The smallest possible gesture that still technically counted as one. Aldridge picked up his drink and came over. He sat down the way Daniel would have sat down. Squarely. Back to the wall. Both of them now with their backs to the wall, facing the room, which wasn't a coincidence. It was just what both of them did without deciding to. Neither of them said anything for a moment. This was fine. Daniel understood, with a faint shock of recognition, that the silence was fine. Not awkward fine, where you are both furiously manufacturing something to say. Actually fine, the way silence between people who share grammar is fine, because the grammar itself carries the weight and nothing needs to be said to prove anyone is present. Aldridge drank. Daniel drank. Aldridge said, "Didn't know you drank here." "I don't," Daniel said. "First time." Aldridge looked at the room. "It's all right. ESB's good. I wouldn't know. I only drink scotch in this place." A pause. "It's a bad idea, financially." "How bad?" "I've stopped calculating." Daniel almost smiled. Not quite. Something moved in his face that wasn't a smile, but was adjacent to it, which was, for him, essentially the same. Aldridge stretched one arm along the back of the empty chair beside him. Not his chair, the third chair, the one nobody was sitting in, and looked at Daniel with a flat, assessing gaze of a man not accustomed to being the one who initiates things, now that he had initiated a thing, working out what came next. "You live around here?" Aldridge said. 9 minutes. Daniel considered. "On foot, right?" Aldridge drank. "I'm Vauxhall." "The bad end. Is there a good end?" "Apparently. I haven't found it in 2 years." This is the strange thing about 2 men who have never spoken, finding they can. It doesn't feel like meeting someone. It feels like remembering someone, like a conversation you've been having underground in some subterranean channel, and now it's been routed to the surface, and the words are finally arriving in the room they were always going to arrive in. They talked about the roster change. Both of them, as it turned out, had been shifted onto the Tuesday through Wednesday pattern 6 weeks ago, which meant both of them had been having their days off be Tuesday and Wednesday for 6 weeks in a city arranged entirely for people with different days off. Everywhere's full on Saturday, Aldridge said. Everywhere's dead on Tuesday. There's no middle. The laundrette was fine. I haven't done laundry in 2 weeks because I kept putting it off to a day that felt more like a laundry day, and then realizing no day feels like a laundry day, and I've now run out of socks. I have a burgundy pair, Daniel said, and then couldn't explain why he'd said that. Aldridge looked at him. Burgundy, he repeated. Not a question, just locating the word. I bought them 18 months ago. I don't know why. Are they good socks? They're fine socks. Then what's the problem? Daniel opened his mouth and then closed it because the answer, they're the wrong color. Everything in my life is supposed to be a specific set of colors, and burgundy isn't one of them, arrived and then departed very quickly, understanding that it was true and also that it was more than he intended to say in the first 10 minutes of the first conversation he'd ever had with this man. No problem, he said. Aldridge accepted this. The pub filled up a little more as the hour moved past 7. A group of office workers came in with that released, unshackled energy of people who have been in a building all day and are now not in a building. Loud, good-naturedly elbowing each other. 2 of them peeled off toward the bar, and the rest took a large table and immediately started the process of deciding what everyone wanted, which was loud and unresolved. Daniel watched them with his trained eyes. Aldridge watched them with his trained eyes. Do you ever miss it? Aldridge said. Daniel looked at him. That. Aldridge nodded toward the group. Whatever that is. Daniel looked back at the group. The elbowing. The easy territorial claiming of a table. The man who'd clearly just said something funny and was now receiving the group's laughter with the satisfied expression of a man who knows his own material. I don't know, Daniel said, which was honest. He genuinely didn't know whether he missed a thing he wasn't sure he'd ever had, or whether what he felt watching them was something more specific. Not envy exactly, more like observing a wildlife documentary about a species you've read about extensively, but never encountered in its natural habitat. I don't miss it, Aldridge said, with the certainty of a man who has had this conversation with himself more often and more thoroughly. I think I do sometimes. And then someone in those groups always does that thing. He paused. You know the thing. The thing where they go too far with a joke, and someone's uncomfortable, but everyone pretends not to notice, and the night curdles at the edges a bit, but you all stay because you paid for the round. Daniel didn't know the thing. He knew the thing from before. From Shropshire, from 19 years of being a normal person with normal Tuesday problems, and the thing happened reliably in groups, and you couldn't stop it, and it left a trace. The job cures that, Daniel said. What does it give you instead? He thought about it. Really thought, which he didn't always do when someone asked him something, because most conversations didn't require it. Most conversations had scripts, and you ran the script, and it was efficient. Certainty, he said finally, about small things. You always know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You always know if you're doing it right. He turned his pint glass a small degree. It's a relief. Aldridge said nothing for a moment. Then, it's lonely though, and that was the thing said. That was the word out in the room. Daniel looked at the table, at the grain of it, at a small ring from where someone's glass had sat and dried and sat again over what must have been years of Tuesday evenings. Yes, he said. The birthday table was singing something. Not well, not unpleasantly, with the specific willingness of people who have stopped caring whether they're doing it properly, which is its own kind of skill. Aldridge had, at some point, stopped managing his posture. Daniel noticed this the way he noticed everything, peripherally, precisely, without comment. The shoulders had dropped by a degree. The jaw had relaxed. The thing Aldridge did on post, the rhythmic flexing, working through something, was completely absent, and in its absence his face was younger. Not dramatically, just less assembled. I tried once, Aldridge said, after a shift. Morrison was going somewhere. I don't know. I heard him mention it. Some bar in Bermondsey he liked. I almost said something. What stopped you? Aldridge made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and an exhale. He was already through the gate. And I thought, what am I going to do, run after him? Like he shook his head. Like we're mates in a film. You could have. Didn't. He drank. Morrison's probably got his whole thing sorted anyway. Probably goes to the same place every week and knows everyone's name, and the barman's got his drink ready before he sits down. Daniel thought about this. About Morrison and his menthol sweets and his slightly loose kit and his jaw-dropping theory about rules and character and the look, that one look in the rain, that half second of compressed communion. Maybe, he said. Probably, Aldridge said. Some people are just naturally configured for it. The having people thing. And some aren't. Aldridge looked at him directly. No deflection in it. Just the plain assessment. How long have you been at Whitehall? 4 years. Christ. He said it with something that wasn't pity. Something more like recognition. 4 years of that. It's not. Daniel started and then stopped because he wasn't sure what he was about to defend. The job. Himself. Some combination of both that didn't have a clean edge between them. It gets in you, Aldridge said. It's not a complaint. It just gets in you, and you don't notice until you're doing something completely normal, standing in a queue, or getting off the tube, or whatever, and you realize you've been completely still for 6 minutes, and the person behind you in the queue is staring. Daniel laughed. An actual laugh. Short but real. It surprised him. Aldridge looked at him with a kind of satisfaction. The look of someone who's landed a thing they weren't sure would land. 6 minutes, Daniel said. I timed it eventually. Out of curiosity. What were you thinking? Aldridge shrugged. Nothing. That's the thing. Not nothing as in distracted. Nothing as in blank. Operational zero. The mode where you're just processing the environment and producing no output. He paused. My sister was with me. She was not impressed. What did she say? She said, Are you actually in there? Aldridge's voice shifted slightly on the last few words. Not much, just the edge of something. She asked it like a real question. Not a joke. The birthday table had stopped singing. Someone was saying something about cake. Daniel looked at his pint. It was nearly finished. The evening had gone somewhere he hadn't expected it to go, moving along the way rivers move. Not in a straight line, adjusting to whatever's there, but always in one direction. What did you tell her? He said. Aldridge was quiet for a moment. I told her yes. He set down his glass. But I was less sure than I sounded. London does this. Not gradually, not with warning. 1 hour the cold is theoretical, something in the forecast, something people mention. The next hour it is personal. It is in your collar and your hands and the space between your shoulder blades. And you think, yes, all right, Winters decided to stop being polite about it. They stood on the pavement outside the marquee. The 2 men outside with pints had gone in. The street was doing its late evening rearrangement. Fewer people, faster pace, the shift from the going somewhere crowd to the going home crowd, which moves differently. Head down. Purposeful. Already mentally inside. Aldridge pulled his jacket tighter. Not dramatically. Just a recognition. Same direction, he said. No, you're Vauxhall. I'm up. Right. Aldridge looked up the road, then back. This was he stopped. Not searching for a word. More like checking the word before he released it. Good. Yes, Daniel said. It was possibly the least decorated exchange of information in the English language. But both of them understood the density inside it, the way you understand compression, not by what's visible, but by what it would take to decompress. They nodded, once each, and went their separate directions. Daniel walked home through the cold. He had his laundry bag over one shoulder and 9 minutes of pavement ahead of him, and a thought that kept rearranging itself as he walked, the way thoughts do when they haven't finished processing yet and are using the movement to continue. He thought about what Aldridge's sister had asked. Are you actually in there? Not a question about consciousness. A question about presence. About whether the thing standing in front of her, the tall, composed, jaw-flexing, operationally blank thing, still contained the person she'd known before the job took up residence. He thought about whether anyone had ever asked him that. He thought about who would ask. He had a mother in Shropshire who rang on Sundays and asked him whether he was eating and whether the flat was warm enough, which was love expressed in the only vocabulary she'd ever felt safe in. He had a university friend, Matt, still vaguely in contact, birthday texts, annual check-in of no particular depth, who asked how things were and received fine and offered, yes, same, works mental, and they both agreed this constituted connection. He had Morrison and Aldridge and Kendall and the rest of the regiment who he stood alongside in all weathers, who he trusted with his life in the operational sense, who he had never sat across a table from and had a drink with until tonight, when one of them had turned around twice at a bar, and the second turn had been the difference. He had the man with the coffee van, who knew about leaking. He stood at the light on Vauxhall Bridge Road and waited for the green man. Around him, a woman on a call, pacing, a cyclist waiting with one foot down, a young man in a delivery jacket consulting his phone with the urgency of someone for whom the phone contains the entirety of the next 20 minutes. The light changed. They all moved. Daniel moved with them, and it struck him briefly, just for a beat, how strange and ordinary this was. Walking with strangers, sharing pavement and timing, not because they knew each other, just because the city had briefly arranged them in the same direction. It happened all day and all night, this accidental synchronicity, these momentary flocks of people with nothing in common except a green light and a direction. He'd spent 4 years becoming invisible to it. The flat was the flat, neutral colored because he'd never got around to thinking about it. Neat because neatness was involuntary by now, an atmospheric condition rather than a choice. The kitchen with its efficient arrangement, the shelf with the book he was most of the way through, the window that looked onto the rear of another building, and the narrow strip of sky between them. He put the laundry away. He stood in the kitchen and didn't make tea immediately, which was unusual because the post-laundry tea was one of the few rituals he'd maintained without military origin, a civilian one, inherited from his mother, the cup of tea as the punctuation mark on a finished task. He looked at the narrow strip of sky through the window. It was dark and cold-looking and punctured by 2 yellow lights from the building opposite, one above the other, windows lit behind thin curtains. Someone was in there. 2 someones, possibly 2 lit windows, 2 presences, or 1 person who'd left 2 lights on, or any configuration of people and empty rooms and lives arranged in ways he couldn't know from here. He made the tea. He sat at the kitchen table with it and thought about the thing Aldridge had said, the one underneath the others, the one that had dropped in and sunk before Daniel had properly tracked its descent. It gets in you. For years of standing still in all weathers, of processing the environment and producing no output, of being the fixed point that everyone else moved around. And somewhere in that stillness, something had calcified that went beyond posture, beyond the formal composure of the post. A way of being in the world. A way of standing slightly apart from it, observing, assessing, remaining fundamentally separate even when surrounded. He'd thought of it as the job. He thought, this is what the job requires, and I do what the job requires, and when I am not doing the job, I return to my baseline. But Aldridge's sister had seen it in a queue. Daniel had sat in a laundrette for 43 minutes watching clothes turn without reaching for his phone or a book or anything at all, and had considered that entirely normal until he'd started to consider it at all. The tea was good, strong, which was the only way he made it. He didn't go to bed for a while. He sat with the book he was most of the way through and actually finished it, which surprised him because the not finishing had been there so long it had started to seem like a permanent state rather than a temporary one. It was a good ending, ambiguous in the way good endings are, not unresolved, but honest about the fact that resolution isn't the same as answers. The main character had arrived somewhere new, not somewhere better necessarily, somewhere different, in a way that was going to require a lot of adjustment. Daniel closed it, sat on the table, looked at the cover for a moment. Then, he did something he hadn't done in. He tried to calculate 6 months, maybe more. He picked up his phone and went to the contacts and found Matt's number, the university friend, the one who asked how things were, and received fine. He didn't call. He typed a message instead, because calling felt too much like a signal flare, and he wasn't ready for anything that bright. He typed, "Random one, but are you still at that place near Bermondsey?" Wondering if you want a pint sometime. He read it twice. It was fine. It was normal. It was the kind of message people sent. People who were configured for the having people thing. People who'd never let it lapse. People who moved easily through the world like they'd been given clear instructions that he'd somehow missed. He sent it, set the phone face down on the table, went to the window, and looked at the two lit windows in the building across the narrow gap. One of them had gone dark. The other was still there, warm yellow behind a thin curtain, a silhouette visible for a moment, and then not visible, just the light, just the signal of presence without the evidence of it. He thought about Aldridge going home to Vauxhall. The bad end. 2 years, and still not found a good end. The brother on the rigs. The sister who asked if he was actually in there. He thought about Morrison, somewhere in some Bermondsey bar he'd never pinpointed, probably exactly as Aldridge had described. Drink ready, name known, something accumulated through years of actually walking through a door and saying yes. He thought about Kendall, the new one, the one who had stopped blinking, who was, right now, in his early months of the calcification, before it set hard, still in the window of time, when it could maybe go differently. Maybe someone should tell him. He didn't know how you told someone. He didn't know the protocol for that, because there was no protocol, because this was the thing no protocol had ever been written for. How to be a person alongside the job. How to let the two things coexist without one consuming the other. But Aldridge had figured out a version of it. Imperfect, lonely at the edges, but real. 2 drinks of scotch on a Tuesday, and the willingness to turn around twice at a bar. That was something. His phone lit up. He looked at it from across the room for a second before crossing to check, because he didn't want the message to not be a reply, and he'd already done the embarrassing thing of caring about whether it was. It was from Matt. Mate, finally. Yes, absolutely. I keep meaning to suggest this, and then forgetting. Thursday? That pub on Druid Street has live jazz now, or there's the one near the station if you want quieter. Daniel read it. Read it again. The ease of it. The uncomplicated ease. Mate, finally. Like the pause hadn't been 6 months or more, like the door had just been left slightly open all this time. Draft-free. No fanfare. Just open. He typed. Quieter. Thursday's good. Sent it. Put the phone down. The second window across the gap was still lit. The next post was Thursday. Horse Guards. 6 a.m. cold enough that the tourists who gathered, and they always gathered, even in October, even at 6 a.m., which was a fact about tourists that never stopped being remarkable, would have their breath visible, little personal clouds of evidence that they were present and alive, and this was worth freezing for. Daniel stood post, which meant, still, visible, processing without output. The thing that looked like nothing from the outside and was from the inside its own specific discipline. Aldridge was 20 feet away. And here is the strange, small, almost invisible thing that happened, which nobody watching would have seen, which would not have registered on any camera or in any tourist photograph, which existed entirely between the two of them in the cold Thursday air. Aldridge's jaw. The rhythmic flex he did, working through something, whatever something it perpetually was different today. Not absent, not resolved, just the rhythm of it was slightly off. More deliberate, like a man trying to remember something or trying to stop remembering it. And at one point, in the space of a minute that contained approximately 3,000 tourists and 2 American children who had been lifted up to wave at the guards and were waving with a total sincerity that was nearly heartbreaking, Aldridge cut his eyes sideways. Not at the children, not at the tourists, at Daniel. 1 second. No rain this time. No horizontal absurdity to commiserate about. Just recognition. The small, dense, heavily compressed acknowledgement of one person to another that says, I was there too. Last Tuesday, in that pub. And it was real, and I'm aware of it, and I'm not going to make a thing of it here in front of 3,000 tourists, but I'm aware of it. Daniel didn't move. His face didn't change. But something, the coffee van man had been right, something always leaks, something in the quality of his stillness shifted by a degree too small to measure and too significant to mistake. He cut his eyes back. 1 second. The children waved. The tourists photographed. The cold did what the cold does in October in London. And the 2 men stood in their respective places, 20 feet apart, in their perfect ceremonial stillness, and were, for the first time in 4 years of knowing each other, not entirely alone. He had a pint with Matt on Thursday evening, the quiet pub near the station. Wood and lamplight, and the barman who didn't know Daniel's name or his drink and required him to specify, which was fine, which was good actually. He ordered the ESB and told Matt it was decent, and Matt, who was a man of enthusiastic opinions about Pub Alesh, immediately had several thoughts about ESB as a category. Daniel listened. He added things. Not much, but things. Matt talked about work being mental, which it apparently still was, and Daniel talked about the roster change and the Tuesday problem, and Matt laughed at the Tuesday problem with the genuine delight of someone who has never had a job with an unusual shift pattern and finds the concept of wrong days off to be a charming affliction. It's like being a vampire, Matt said. Except the thing you can't do is go to brunch. I don't brunch, Daniel said. That's what a vampire would say. Daniel drank his ESB. It's good to do this, Matt said, with the uncomplicated directness of a man who had always found it easy to say things. Yes, Daniel said, and meant it, both syllables, all the way through. He walked home at 10:30, the same route, up through Vauxhall, across the Bridge Road, through Pimlico, past the laundrette where the Tuesday had started, dark now and padlocked, the machines visible as dim shapes through the glass. He stopped for a second, looked at the machine he always used. He thought about all the Tuesdays, all the identical rotations, the burgundy sock appearing and disappearing, the Portuguese woman's laughter on her phone, the old man asleep with his chin on his chest. He thought about the thought that had arrived completed, without warning, without context, somewhere between a spin cycle and a dryer. I have never spoken to another guard. Not off duty. Not once. The thought had been right. And it had also, by the act of arriving, already started being wrong. That was the strange thing about the thoughts that come assembled from somewhere else. They arrive as facts. They travel as facts. And then the thing they describe quietly begins to change, and the fact remains, but it is already becoming a record of what used to be true, which is a different thing entirely. He kept walking. Home was 4 minutes. The strip of sky between buildings was clear tonight. Not the dirty wool gray of Tuesday. Something cleaner, something that had rinsed itself while nobody was looking. A few stars visible in the gap, or what passed for stars in London, which were mostly very bright and very high aircraft, and the occasional stubborn planet that had decided London's light pollution was not its problem. He unlocked the flat, put his jacket on the hook, left one light on in the kitchen, not both, just one, and went to bed at a reasonable hour for a man with an unreasonable job, thinking about nothing in particular, or about everything in the way that nothing in particular sometimes conceals everything, the thoughts circling at the edges of sleep without landing, until they did. Outside, London did what London always does. It kept going without him, and tomorrow he would stand still inside it, as he had done for 4 years, as he would continue to do. Visible and invisible, present and absent, the wall that the city moved around. But he had sat at a table with someone who understood the wall, and he had sent a message that got a reply that said, "Mate, finally." And the burgundy socks were in the drawer, and the window across the gap still had its light. And maybe that was enough to be going on with.